Hey, kindergarten, this is Miss Dyer. I am going to read your story for the week, one of them. Um, like I said in the overview PowerPoint, we are going to be learning about our nation's capital and American symbols and things like that. So before we do the story, I want to pull up some words you're going to hear and kind of go over those. One of the words you're going to hear is the word capital. And capital is the most important city in a country or a state. So what's pretty cool about where we live is we live in our state's capital. We live in Nashville, and that's the capital of Tennessee. But if people live in Washington, D.C., they are living in our nation's capital, and our nation is the United States of America. And I think most of y'all know that. So Washington, D.C. is our nation's capital. Another word that you are going to hear in the read aloud is the word liberties, and that just means freedom, getting to choose what we want to do. Another word you're going to hear is nation. So like I just said, our nation is the United States of America. So that's the country that we live in. The state we live in is Tennessee. The city we live in is Nashville. Another word you're going to hear is president. And a president is an elected leader of a country. That means we get to choose who our president is. We get to vote. We get to choose who is the president of the United States. Another word you're going to hear is symbol. And a symbol is a picture or object that represents a word or idea. So basically, it's just a picture that represents something. For Buena Vista, our symbol is a hand with plants growing out. And that shows, that's a symbol of our school, that we are on the grow. We are students on the grow. A symbol for an iPhone might be the little apple symbol. So we see symbols all around us, and they have meaning. So now I'm going to take us to our read aloud. I'm going to show this picture. So you all know this is the American flag. We've colored it before and we've talked about it. But before we dive into that reading, I want to see what all you can remember about kings and queens. Now, we learned about that a couple of months ago at school, and remember we had a tea party because we know that in England, the king and queen, they drink tea, so we had a tea party. We got to wear crowns. So I want you to pause and think about that, and I want you to try to remember what you learned about kings and queens. Okay, I love all that information you remembered. I hope you told it to the adult or sibling or whoever you're with right now. I'm going to give us some little reminders about some differences between kings and presidents. So a king is a male ruler of a kingdom. He's the man. And then a queen is the female ruler of the kingdom, a woman. And a kingdom is the place and people ruled by a king or queen. Now, the United States is not a kingdom because we do not have a king or queen. A king or queen usually lives in a palace or a castle. Once a person is king or queen, they stay king or queen for the rest of their life. Now, a president only can serve either 4 years or 8 years. They don't get to serve their whole life. So there's a difference. I want you to think about the differences between kings and presidents. I want you to see if you can think of some more. Now, just a few reminders. The United States does not have a king. The leader of our country is called the president. Our country's form of government is democracy. That means we get to vote on things. We get to choose things. You know how sometimes we would get to vote in class with what our reward was going to be. So that was a democracy. We got to vote in. We got to vote. We are ruled by the people here in the States. All right, now I'm going to read our story. So just bear with me. The American flag is a symbol of our nation. Symbol and nation were two of those words we learned about. The United States, so the American flag is a symbol of our nation, the United States. And a reminder, a symbol is a picture or object that represents a word or idea. And a nation is a country. You can see that the flag is red, white, and blue. We have one of these hanging up in our classroom. You can see that it has red and white stripes. Now I want you to look at whoever you're sitting with and tell them if something is red, white, red, white, red, white, what is that called? Turn and tell someone. Correct, it's called a pattern. Our flag also has 50 stars, and each star is a symbol for one of the states in the United States of America. So I want you to name the state that you live in, and then if you know any other states, be sure to name those out loud right now. All right, now I'm going to move down to another picture. There is one very important city in the United States that is not in any of the 50 states. In fact, it's the nation's capital. It's the city where most of the decisions that affect the country are made and where the government is located. Our nation's capital city is the part of the United States where the President of the United States lives, Washington, D.C. So the President is the elected leader of our country, and that means he was chosen by the people. People voted for our President. And he lives in what is called Washington, D.C. That's where his home is, in Washington, D.C. All right, now we're going to go to the next part. Men from each of the original colonies, and we talked about the original colonies. There was 13. We talked about that when we talked about Columbus. Men from each of the original colonies helped write the Constitution, a plan for how the new country should be run. We call these men the Founding Fathers. The Founding Fathers decided they wanted the country to be run by a president instead of a king. Once a person is king or queen, he or she remains in that position for the rest of his or her life. He or she is not elected by the people and might not represent the interests of the people. That means what we want. The Founding Fathers didn't want one person to tell everyone what to do, as a king does. Instead, they wanted a leader who would listen to what the people wanted and work hard to get them what they needed. To make sure the president didn't become like a king, they decided to write the Constitution. Everyone say Constitution. Good job. The Constitution is a set of rules for the president to follow. They also decided that the president would have to be elected by the people. The president would not be born into the position like a king is, and he could only be president for for 4 years before the people would vote for a president again. So remember, we also talked about a prince and a princess, and those were people who were going to become a king and queen, and we don't have that in the States. They have to be voted on. All right. So now let's see what it says about this picture. So what do you see in this picture? Tell whoever you're with what you see in this picture. So this picture shows what the White House looked like a long, long time ago. When the founding fathers started to think about where the president would live, they started to worry. If the president lived in the state he was from, it would make that state feel more important than all the others. The founding fathers were afraid that one of the states would try to take over and be in charge of the others. They decided to write in the Constitution that a special city should be built, no bigger than 10 miles wide, which would serve as the nation's capital. The capital city would not be in any state, so no one state could say that it was in charge of the country. This city was to be called Washington in honor of George Washington, who was our first president. Eventually, Washington grew into the area that we now call the District of Columbia, or Washington, D.C. So who was Washington, D.C. named for? Does anyone remember who I said the first president was? Good job, George Washington. It's our first president. If you've ever visited, if you visited Washington, D.C. today, you would be able to see the White House. And this is the house where the president lives. The president moves into this house when he or she becomes the president, and then moves out when the next president is elected. But not just presidents live there. Their families and even their pets come to live with them in the White House. So now we're going to see a pet from one of the presidents that our country has had. Have you ever seen a picture of this dog? His name is Bo, and he lives with the President Barack Obama and his family. When President Obama was first chosen to be our president in 2008, he promised his daughters they could get a dog to live with them in the White House. Bo moved into the White House about 3 months after President Obama and his family moved there. And one of his favorite activities is playing outside with Obama's daughters. Now, Obama used to be our president. Our president right now is Donald Trump. Now we're going to take a look at what is called the Oval Office. And this is the office of the president. The president doesn't just live in the White House. He or she works there too. The part of the White House where the president works is called the West Wing. The president's office has a special name too, the Oval Office. Sometimes the president signs laws or gives speeches from the Oval Office. Oh, if you have a pencil or paper, I want you to try to draw an oval right now for me. So the next picture we have is the White House, the Capitol building, and the Supreme Court. One of the president's most important jobs is to enforce the rules of the Constitution. He has to make sure that we are following the rules and that we are working together as a country. The president doesn't run the government alone as a king would. The government is made up of a team of 3 groups. the President, Congress, and the Supreme Court. The Founding Fathers made sure that all three, the President, the Congress, and the Supreme Court, had equally important jobs so that the President didn't hold all the power like a king would, and so that people's liberties would be protected. So remember, a king can make all the decisions and everyone has to obey it, but if we have a president, we get to have liberties because we get to do the voting. If you think back to when we learned about Christopher Columbus, the Pilgrims left England because they didn't have any liberties. They didn't have freedom, and they wanted that. They couldn't decide where they wanted to go to church, or if they were told they had to go to church, and then they couldn't even pick the church. So here's some other buildings that are in Washington, D.C. We have the Lincoln Memorial and the Jefferson Memorial, and those are some presidents of the United States. Because so many of our past presidents have lived in Washington, D.C., it is also a place where people often build statues and other buildings to honor them. If you visited Washington, D.C., you would find many monuments to past presidents. One famous monument is called the Lincoln Memorial, which is right here. And then another famous monument is the Jefferson Memorial on this side. These monuments are symbols to remind us how important these past presidents were in our nation's history. So they did a lot for our country, and when we build these statues, that's a way for us to remember them. We also here have the Washington Monument. The Washington Monument is one of many people's favorite monuments to visit in Washington, D.C. It is the world's tallest stone building. When you get to the top of the tower, you can see all of Washington, D.C. But you don't have to go to Washington, D.C. to appreciate our country and its leaders. Every time you say the Pledge of Allegiance or you sing the national anthem, you can let everyone around you know that you are proud to be a part of our country. So there's a few things I want you to do. We're going to go to this next slide. We're going to say the Pledge of Allegiance together. And it's been a little while since we've said it. So remember, when we're pledging allegiance, we're touching our hearts and we're looking at the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The next time you see the American flag, remember that our 50 states all share a belief in the liberty and justice, or the freedom and fairness for everyone. And remember that these United States of America all share the same government, which is led by the President, the Congress, and the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C. So what I want you to do right now is I want you to talk to either a sibling, a parent, a family member, friend, whoever's there with you. I want you to tell them the main idea of what I just read to you. And if you need to go back and listen to some of it, you can. I want you to tell them the main idea, the topic of what we talked about, the big things that you remember. And then I also want you to compare and contrast kings and presidents. I want you to draw and write about the differences that kings and presidents have, and then something that they might have that's the same about a king and a president. Again, if you have any questions, let your teacher know. We're going to be calling you tomorrow for you to give us the main idea of your story, of the story that we read, and for you to tell us about it, ask any questions about it. So be on the lookout for that call or text. If you have any questions, let us know. I hope you enjoyed learning about our nation's capital.